A very good morning, everyone, all our esteemed speakers. Thank you to AIOC for giving me this opportunity. I'll be speaking on a very interesting course on indirect ophthalmoscopy, and I'm helped by a stalwart of speakers here, seven speakers who will be giving you all detailed steps on how to do this procedure. Indirect ophthalmoscopy is a very useful and indispensable tool for a detailed and comprehensive examination of the entire retina. Many diseases involving the peripheral retina can be missed if a detailed examination is not done. In these times of COVID and social distancing, the distance between the patient and the doctor in indirect ophthalmoscopy, as opposed to direct ophthalmoscopy, offers a well desired advantage. This 75-minute instruction course is not aimed at making you experts and masters in this procedure. It is just an insight to create a willingness to learn, to clear more doubts, and practice, practice, practice. In our previous instruction courses, we had a very interesting interactive sessions with funders drawing charts, indirect ophthalmoscopes, and color pencils. But unfortunately, in this virtual world, we will not be able to have this. Though at the end of the talk, the symposium will be open for any questions that anyone wants to answer and ask. So without much ado, I would like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Shivani Sinha. Dr. Shivani will be speaking on indications of indirect ophthalmoscopy. She has done her FVRS from Narayan Nethralaya, Bangalore, and she's currently working as a senior resident in RIO IGIMS, Patna. So over to you, Dr. Shivani.
Ma'am, it has the host has disabled participant from screen.
Yeah, from a screen sharing, correct. अभी वही check कर रहे थे. नहीं आप you can go. You can go down.
Sir, on.
है. Take.
Are these slides visible?
Yes.
Okay, at the outset, I'd like to thank AIOC and Dr. Pooja ma'am for making me a part of this IC. So I would be talking about the indications of indirect ophthalmoscopy. The history of indirect ophthalmoscopy dates back to 1852, which underwent a series of changes, and finally in 1946, Charles Schepens invented the modern binocular indirect ophthalmoscope. So basically, what are the difference between direct and indirect ophthalmoscope? The indirect ophthalmoscope provides us with a binocular vision with depth perception, a wider field of view, and it enables us to examine the peripheral retina with the help of scleral indentation. It is unaffected by the refractive state of the patient's eye and can be used in the operating room. It allows us to examine through the cataract haze and let us know about the macular lesions and the peripheral lesions. So these are the key differences between direct and indirect. The important one being the brightness of the indirect being more than the direct, the presence of stereopsis, the resolution being better in indirect, the field of view being more in indirect, and the working distance being longer in indirect. It also has a feature of small pupil, which enables us to examine through a non-dilated pupil. Let us come to the common indications. So when examining a normal patient with with refractive errors, we need to go through the common retinal degenerations, which are lattice degeneration, snail track, snowflake, paving stone degenerations, white without pressure, retinal hole, retinoschisis, meridional fold, and white with pressure. These are all our peripheral lesions and need to be examined on scleral indentation through indirect ophthalmoscope. So why are these degenerations important to be screened while doing IO? So there are certain degenerations which predisposes to RRD, the commonly being lattice degeneration, snail track, retinoschisis, white without pressure, retinal hole, and meridional fold with retinal hole. So here we see a lattice degeneration in the superonasal quadrant of the left eye, while in the periphery we see a snail track degeneration with a hole there. These are all yellow-white spots seen in the periphery of the left eye. This is an example of an atrophic retinal hole seen in the inferior periphery. So this is yellow-white patches which we see in the between the equator and the mid-periphery. This is an example of white without pressure. So retinoschisis needs to be differentiated from retinal detachment, which we can do on IO. So these are key features on IO which helps us differentiate between retinoschisis and retinal detachment. So this is an example of a meridional fold with a hole at the apex. And these are all uncommon ones like base, cyst, pearls, and honeycombs present in the which can be seen only on indentation at the ora. So let us come to some case scenarios which may be interesting. So one of the most common complaints which we get in OPD are floaters. A patient coming to the imaginary situation where a young female complains of sudden onset of floaters. There can be multiple scenarios, but two common scenarios can be a normal anterior segment examination with no anterior vitreous cells, or it can be a normal anterior segment examination with anterior vitreous cells. Now, the first scenario mandates us to screen till periphery for a retinal break, which may have caused shearing of the retinal vessels, leading to mild VH. So, likewise, we see a horseshoe tear in the periphery. While in the second scenario, we need to look till the ora for snow banking or snowballs to rule out intermediate uveitis. Other common refractive error which we need to screen thoroughly is myopia, where we can see posterior staphyloma and peripheral retinal degenerations are more common in myopia.
আমার একটা ওয়েবিনার আছে অল ইন্ডিয়া অপথ্যালমোলজি তোমরা দেখো একটা রাউন্ড দিয়ে দাও ওকে
predisposing to detachments, and also a myopic patient complaining of sudden loss of vision needs to be screened for retinal detachment and also for myopic CNVMs. Other common indication is trauma, which needs a thorough examination for giant retinal tear and dialysis. Also, we need to screen for choroidal ruptures, macular holes, and peripheral RP changes in these patients. So epiretinal membrane is one of the findings, and before labeling it as idiopathic, we need to rule out all the etiology of the ERM so as to have a better management approach. Likewise, this young patient complaining of diminution of vision and floaters needs to be screened in the periphery for and we can see that there are streaks of hemorrhages and peripheral sheathing suggestive of Eales disease. Diabetic retinopathy, we need to look for the microvascular changes along with the proliferative changes and components of the tractional retinal detachment. Likewise, choroidal neovascularization needs to be screened for AMD and PCV, along with we have to look for drusens in these patients. In retinal vascular disorders, the common being the retinal vein occlusions, the CRVO, along with the disc, we need to look for disc edema and the peripheral dilatation and tortuosity, and specifically look for NVEs, which will lead us to help us to better manage the patient by photocoagulation. And we need to look for emboli in retinal arterial occlusions. So one of the confusing situations when not examined properly will be CSCR and retinal detachment, because a large NSD in case of CSCR, if not properly screened till periphery, will misdiagnose it as retinal detachment, while a retinal detachment, if not properly evaluated, will be mistaken for a CSCR, if not properly evaluated. So retinal detachment patients also need to be examined till periphery for HSTs, lattice with holes, and any other breaks which have predisposed this patient to retinal detachment. In uveitic patient, examination through vitreous haze is enabled by the bright light. We have to look for the ERM, look for granulomas and other characteristic uveitic lesions, along with peripheral vascular sheathing and snow banking and snowballs in these patients. In pre-op, we have to be very particular when examining a patient of cataract surgery through IO, because any macular lesions and any peripheral lesions need to be excluded. Macular lesions because of the prognosis, and the peripheral lesions so as not to predispose these patients to retinal detachment while we are operating or post-operatively, and in retinal detachment for proper workup of these patients. We use it during our scleral buckling procedures and pneumatic retinopexy. In ocular tumors, it plays a very important role because SRF associated with uveal melanomas, if not properly evaluated, will lead to a diagnosis of RD without diagnosing melanomas. One of the very important roles of IO lies in pediatric vascular disorders evaluation, especially in cases of ROP, because these lesions are in zone 2 or zone 3, which needs to be screened only through the IO, not possible through the DOs. And Coats disease, one of the common diseases of the childhood, also needs a thorough peripheral examination for telangiectasias and the exudations. Retinoblastoma also needs to be examined under EUA to rule out multiple foci of calcifications. This is an example of excellent retinoschisis, and we need to look for peripheral veils in these patients to make a diagnosis of XLR. So also, a child with nystagmus is a very characteristic indication for doing indirect ophthalmoscopy. And briefly coming to the non-contact slit lamp biomicroscopy, this is the mechanism of non-contact slit lamp biomicroscopy, and it is very important tool for evaluating the macular lesions. One of the new indications which we have come across in this COVID era is fundus evaluation, be it a non-COVID patient or a COVID patient. We need to examine without physical contact, making ourselves safe and the patient safe from us also. So as to conclude, eye examination is not complete without a meticulous indirect ophthalmoscopy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shivani, for so nicely enumerating the various indications and such colorful pictures that you have shown. So now, after understanding when to do indirect ophthalmoscopy, we must understand the machine and we must understand the optics of indirect ophthalmoscopy. So that will be nicely dealt by Dr. Vishal Kishore, who is an eminent VR surgeon and a fellow medical retina from Arvind Eye Hospital. He is presently consultant medical retina at Vision Eye Care and Laser Center, Patna. So over to you, Dr. Vishal.
I'm not able to share my screen.
Admin, can you please help?
Shivani has to unshare first.
Acha, okay.
Shivani, unshare your
I've
screen.
already unshared.
Okay.
So down arrow share screen.
Yeah, I have.
They have not given a timer for the speakers. You're muted, Pooja, you're muted.
I had requested the admin to start the timer, but I don't know what's happening. Any people from the admin are there, please, who can help
Yes,
us?
doctor. I'll just check one minute, please.
Yeah, now I'm able to, I think. Okay.
Great. Yes.
Yeah.
We can see.
The fireball was on. Okay, so good morning, everybody. At this outset, I would like to thank Dr. Pooja ma'am for making part of this, me as a part of this IC, and AIS for such a wonderful virtual platform. So coming to my talk on this optic and principle of indirect ophthalmoscope. Now to start with, basically, this is the common indirect ophthalmoscope which we use in our day-to-day practice. It has this illuminating system, and then you have the headgear to fit on a head with a depth knob and slide knob. So basically, this whole concept of indirect ophthalmoscope was questioned and started in 1864 by Nasal. And the whole idea of indirect ophthalmoscope was to make your eye highly myopic by using a high power convex lens in front of the patient eye, so that the real inverted and laterally reversed image is formed close to the principal foci of the lens, which lies somewhere between the lens and the observer. And since in this technique we see the fundus indirectly through a condensing lens, so it was called indirect ophthalmoscope. So this is the basic concept to how you do indirect ophthalmoscope. Basically, you make the eye myopic by using a high power convex lens. Then the second principle which comes into play is that Gould-Strand principle. This is very important to do indirect ophthalmoscopy, because if you can't master this principle, then always you have that glare reflection, you won't focus the retina. So what is this principle? Basically, this principle says that the illuminating beam, the beam which originates from your indirect ophthalmoscope, they passes through cornea, pupillary aperture, lens, and reaches the fundus. While the viewing beam, which is reflected back from the retina, which passes from the lens, pupillary aperture, and through the cornea, it reaches your eye. So these two beams, they should be parallel to each other throughout the pathway, except when they meet at the fundus. Because if they meet or collide anywhere in the pathway, it will cause scattering of light, reflection, and you won't be able to view the fundus. Only place where they meet is the fundus, which you view. Then the third concept is that you have to decrease your IPD, the IPD which normally you have around 60 millimeter, that is decreased here around 15 millimeter by use of prism and mirror. This is the schematic diagram. You can see this is the IPD of the observer, and with the age of this reflecting mirror and the prism, it is decreased to 15 millimeter. So with these three principles, we start doing indirect ophthalmoscope. So what is the advantage? Since Dr. Shivani has said the same thing, so I'll just skip this slide. While you start doing indirect ophthalmoscope, you have to just remember that the lens with silver coating, that should face downward, that is towards the patient eye. And while you do the indirect ophthalmoscope, your hand, the index and the index finger and the thumb finger, they should hold the 20 diopter lens or whatever lens you are using, and the other fingers should act as the pivot or the fulcrum, which even helps to open the eyes. And with these two fingers, you have to move your lens up and down. Now, various lenses are used, like 14 diopter, 20 diopter, 30 diopter. And as you increase this diopter of the lens, the magnification decrease, because magnification is basically calculated by the IL power, that is 60 diopter, and you divide the lens power which you are using. Like in case of 20 diopter, the magnification is down three times. But you have to remember, the more you magnify, the field of vision decreases. So with 14 diopter, you may have 3.8 magnification, but you will be only seeing the 35-40 degree of the retina. While in case of 20 diopter, it is around 41 degree of retina. And in 30 diopter, you see almost around 53 to 54 degree of the retina. So as you increase the diopter of the lens, the retina view increases, but the magnification decreases. This is as the same concept which we use in slit line biomicroscope, like as in 90 diopter and 78 diopter. Same concept is there. There's a video I have made. Whatever principle we have discussed till now, it is just while doing practically, I have shown it. Normally you do indirect ophthalmoscopy in dark room, but since I have to record this, so it was done in a illuminated room. Here this concept of binocularity comes, like since your IPD, normal IPD is more, but in IO have to adjust so that you have a good binocularity and depth of view.
Dr. Vishal, we cannot hear any audio in the video.
Okay, no audio is there. Okay, fine. Is it audible now?
No, still
Okay,
not.
okay. I'll then explain here. Basically, yeah.
Dr. Vishal, I'll be speaking more on the technique.
Okay. Okay, so I'll just skip this video because we have discussed that
Wednesday
illuminating. Okay.
The
Okay.
parts. So
Okay. So with this, because this is the only optics in principle. So thank you.
thank you, Dr. Vishal. This was a very beautiful presentation. You explained the principle of indirect ophthalmoscopy so well, and also the different parts of the indirect ophthalmoscope. So now, once we know how to handle the instrument, why don't we understand how to draw what we see in the patient's eye? Because documenting and drawing the structures are as important as what we are seeing, so that we can put our knowledge into the patient's the treatment of the patient and how we manage the patient. So going on to color coding and fundus drawing, which will be nicely dealt by Dr. Abhishek Kumar Kedia. He is a very eminent VR surgeon, and he's the director of Lakshmi Netralaya in Ara, Bihar. So over to you, Dr. Abhishek, for the color coding and fundus drawing.
Good morning, everyone. At the outset, I would like to thank Pooja ma'am for giving opportunity to present in this IC and the AIS for this virtual platform. This is an important topic for the day because fundus drawing helps in comparing the changes in pathology on follow-up visits, and it also helps our teammates and others to understand the pathology better. Just by giving a glance at the fundus photograph in a busy OPD can give us a lot of information. And there are various advantages associated with it, like it's less expensive than a fundus camera, and at times it may be difficult to get all the information on the fundus camera because of the levels of lesion. So we can draw all the lesion beautifully in the fundus diagram, and it is also helpful in medical legal cases. With this brief, I would like to go further. The prerequisites are an examination table, an indirect ophthalmoscope, a 20 diopter lens, the various stationery like color pencils, an eraser, and a scleral depressor. Fundus charting is done on this chart, which is known as Amsler-Dubois chart, and it has got 3 circles. The innermost is the circle representing the equator. The second one is the ora serrata, that is the middle one, and the third one is the junction between the pars plana and the pars pliccata. We can see the Roman numericals here. It is nothing but to denote the extent and localization of the lesion, so in which clock hours the lesion is situated. When the fundus image is obtained as dealt by Dr. Vishal, it is seen inverted and laterally reversed. So to overcome this problem, we need to put the chart in which we are drawing the fundus diagram in the inverted manner. Like you can see here, the 6 o'clock has been put towards the patient's head and 12 o'clock towards the patient's feet end. So whatever we see in the quadrant, whichever we are examining, has to be drawn in the quadrant of the eye which is nearest to the. It should not be like you are seeing supratemporal quadrant and you are drawing it in the supratemporal quadrant again, because we have inverted the chart. So it has to be drawn in the infranasal quadrant, which is nearest to the examiner. And whatever, another thing to remember here is that the lesion which is in the periphery is the most anterior, and lesion which is seen in the center is the most posterior. And it is also important to examine the retina standing 180 degree away from the part of the retina being seen. So suppose if we are examining the temporal retina, then we should stand on the nasal side of that eye and vice versa. So this patient is having a supratemporal, the quality of the diagram is not good, but just for depiction. This patient is having supratemporal horseshoe shape here, which you can see here, and a lattice in the supranasal quadrant. So it will be seen in the drawn in the chart like depicted here. So the lattice will come in this quadrant and the horseshoe shape here will come in this quadrant. Like here, it has to be drawn because the horseshoe shape here can be seen in the center of the lens, so it will be drawn in near the equator, and the lattice is seen more peripherally, so it will be coming between the first circle and the second circle. One thing to remember here is that we should draw the mirror image, not the, exactly the same thing. With this brief in mind, and more so, this will be dealt by Dr. Sangeet Mittal for utilizing it in pre-operative planning and all. So I'll be coming to color coding, which is important part of any retinal diagram. So basically, we should remember that red stands for attached retina and the retinal arteries and hemorrhages. Blue stands for detached retina and retinal veins and edema. Green is anything in vitreous, so like vitreous hemorrhage and media opacities. Yellow is for exudates, like retinal and choroidal exudates. Brown is for choroidal detachments and pigmented lesions. So these are the various pathologies which can be depicted as drawn. Shall be discussing subsequently. The solid red is used for denoting pathologies like vascular tumor can be drawn like this. Dot and blot hemorrhages in diabetic retinopathy can be drawn as drawn here. The subhilar hemorrhage can be drawn like a boat-shaped hemorrhage. The vortex vein can be drawn like this. A horseshoe tape can be drawn in horseshoe with a solid red and outlines of blue. A simple retinal hole can be drawn as solid red with blue outline. And schisis, if it has got outer layer hole, then we can just draw like a normal hole as described, whereas the inner retinal layer hole can be described as red linings with blue outlines. Now coming to blue solid, the retinal detachment can be drawn in whichever quadrant it is like it is, and it is drawn in solid blue. If it is an exudative detachment, then we can denote the sifting fluid with discontinuous lines. And the lattice is drawn with blue hatchings with the blue boundaries. So, and the flat neovaspiration can be drawn as this region. Coming to green, the asteroids can be drawn as small green dots. The PVD, whether it's incomplete or complete, can be drawn as semicircle or circle. And the vitreous hemorrhage can be drawn like these zigzag lines. The IOL, if present in the vitreous, can be drawn in the shape of an IOL. And the vitreous substitutes can be drawn in near to the circle representing ora serrata all around. Coming to the brown color, this is PET, which is drawn as a small circle in the macula, and this is the old brown pigments in the detached retina. This is the pars plana cyst. So rarely we draw something here, but if it's pars plana cyst is present, we can draw in this between the second and the third circle, and this we can draw like this for a choroidal tumor. And this is choroidal mound, which is choroidal detachment, which is drawn as a dome-shaped elevation. Now coming to yellow, the hard exudates present in various diseases like branch-threaded macular occlusion or diabetic macular edema can be drawn like the small dots, and fresh laser marks are drawn like this as surrounding the horseshoe tear or this lesion. And the long ciliary nerves are drawn like a small radial, a small horizontal lines, and this is nothing but the retinal edema. The black solid colors are used to denote the hyperpigmentation or the seeded vessels, like you normally draw a vessel and then just cross it like these lines. And then in case of chronic RD, we draw demarcation like line like this, so it denotes that it's an old RD. And in attached retina also, we can draw a buccal indentation with the help of a black color. Now coming to various real life scenarios, like these fundus photos, this patient is having right eye photoretinopathy, and he's having neurosensory detachment. So this will be drawn like this is optic nerve head, and this is the neurosensory detachment. This patient is having right eye supratemporal branch retinal vein occlusion, so it will be drawn like this. This has been drawn on computer, so it's not very accurate, but I have tried to make it look almost accurate. So this is macular edema, and these are the various hemorrhages and the hard exudates. And this patient fortunately presented to us within 1 hour of presentation, and this patient has got central retinal artery occlusion with typical chirated spots and surrounding retinal edema. And this patient could regain vision of 6/6, very fortunate. So this can be drawn like a retinal edema with chirated spot in the center. This patient is having temporal retinal detachment. The hole is not very well seen here, but on indirect ophthalmoscopy, it was there in supratemporal quadrant. So it can be drawn, the detachment can be drawn like this. This configuration is not very popular, not popular. This is not very well marketed because of the drawing with the computer, but a hole which was present in supratemporal quadrant at 10 o'clock meridian can be drawn like this.
Sorry to
This
interrupt you, doctor. I would request you to please cut the session.
Yeah. And this patient is having cystoid macular edema. So we can see here on the FFA, the patelloid leak. And this patient, the cystoid macular edema can be drawn like radial spokes. And this patient is having PDR. So the various retinal exudates, the preretinal and the vitreous hemorrhage and the fibrosis can be drawn like this. So the take-home message is that fundus photograph is very important in our retinal examination, and it helps our teammates and gives us a chance to depict the pathology in a very lucid manner, and it helps us in managing the patient further better. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishek, for a wonderful presentation. Nice depiction. So with this, our next presentation by Dr. Pooja Sinha ma'am. And again, since she's the ringmaster of this IC, she doesn't need any introduction, but as the quorum says, you have to introduce her. So she's basically trained VR surgeon from Shankar Netralaya and presently the medical director of AVI Institute. Wonderful doctor, wonderful human being. So Pooja ma'am, on to you.
Thank you, Dr. Vishal, for introducing me. And after having known the indications and the machine and about the machine, let's go on to the technique of indirect ophthalmoscopy and how do we do this. So, as nicely explained by Dr. Vishal, these are the parts of the indirect ophthalmoscope. The first most important thing that we have to do is correct positioning and adjustment of the bio headset. One must remember that if the machine is not fitting properly on your head, if it is too tight or it is too loose, you will not be comfortable with the procedure and you will miss important findings. There are two knobs, as I have explained, the top knob and the back knob, which you have to adjust so that it nicely fits on the head. Next, we come to the rheostat, which controls the intensity of illumination. We must remember that the illumination should not be to the brightest because that will create a dazzle effect and the patient will not be comfortable. The patient will keep squeezing his eyelids and the procedure will become more and more difficult. So always keep it medium and comfortable for the patient. This is the lever at the bottom that you can see. It can be moved to converge the illumination and the viewing beams so that a stereopsis can be achieved in small pupils, that is 2 millimeters. And very nicely explained by Dr. Vishal, the Gulfstran's principle comes into view, and you can see that the illuminating beam and the two viewing beams always have to be in the same diameter so that stereopsis can be achieved at all times. Now comes the adjustment knob on the top right-hand side, which helps us to adjust the height and angulation of the optics. This has to be very nicely done. Next is adjusting the interpupillary diameter, which has to be done with the two push buttons at the bottom of the instrument, at the bottom of the optics. This is what I'm explaining. There are two push levers at the bottom, which you have to slide towards one another so that you can achieve the proper interpupillary diameter. These are the different filters that we have to use: the red free, the yellow, and the blue filter. And the uses of the filters. The red free filter is basically blocks the structures below the RP and enhances the contrast of the retinal blood vessels and the hemorrhages. It helps in the cup disc ratio assessment, and it helps to identify the nerve fiber layer dropout, which is a sign of glaucoma. The blue filter can enhance reflectivity of the optic distribution, and it is for use with fluorescein and fluorescein angiography. And the yellow filter reduces the UV exposure. These is the different spot sizes that we use. When the pupils are very small, then the spot size has to be reduced. So the next most important thing is centering, which has to be done on the thumb of the outstretched hand, so that the central beam of light is illuminating the tip of the thumb completely. You do it like this, or you do it against the wall. Always remember that indirect ophthalmoscopy has to be done in a darkened room. The patient's pupil has to be fully dilated and the examiner is partially dark adapted. The fundus chart is clipped on a rigid board that rests on the patient's chin. It is oriented upside down so that the 12 o'clock is facing the patient's feet and the 6 o'clock is towards the chin. What instructions do we give to the patient? The patient has to be instructed to keep the fellow eyes open. Sometimes when the patient is not able to do that, ask him to outstretch his thumb and look in the different cardinal directions of gaze, or use their thumb for fixation. The lens has to be held in a very proper fashion. The condensing lens is held between the thumb and the index finger, and the free fingers are placed on the patient's face to stabilize the lens and retract the lids. So basically both the hands have to be used. The light beam has to be central, illuminating the beam completely. Then you move the lens in position and slowly raise the lens while the pupil and the red reflex fills the lens view. This line is very important. The image system, that is the pupillary space and the fundus of the patient's eye, your condensing lens, and the indirect ophthalmoscope always have to be in the same line. If the view goes black or it appears inverted, you have moved too far away from the eye. So this is what I was trying to say. The first is the correct focal length, then the middle one is too high, and the last one is too low. So the dominant hand basically retracts the upper lid with the help of your thumb. And you have to hold the lens between the thumb and the index finger of the other hand, which also the three fingers that you can see in the middle picture, which is seen well, has to retract the lower lid and act as a fulcrum. These three fingers do not leave the chin. You don't have to leave the chin. It has to be resting on the patient's chin. And then with a rhythmic fashion, the lens is moved up and down so that you can get a good view. Examination of the fundus periphery, as very nicely explained by Dr. Abhishek, the examiner has to be standing at the opposite end of the meridian to be examined. So if you are examining the 6 o'clock position, the examiner is standing at the 12 o'clock position and the patient is gazing downwards. So always remember the quadrant which has to be examined, the patient will be seeing toward the same quadrant, but the examiner will be standing 180 degrees opposite to that quadrant. This is the important take-home point that I'm trying to tell. So this is the examination of the posterior pole, including the disc and the macula, as I said. This is the examination of the inferior retinal periphery. The patient is looking inferiorly and the examiner is standing 180 degrees opposite. And note the angulation that I am making. You have to keep tilting backwards and forwards like a Bharatnatyam dancer all around the patient so that the stereopsis is maintained at all times. So these three things have to be in the same line, as I mentioned to you, and ample space between the chair and the wall helps you to move all across the patient, all around the patient, and examine from all different angles. So this is the examination of the superior retinal periphery, where the patient is looking superiorly towards the quadrant which you are examining, but the doctor is standing 180 degrees opposite and tilting backwards, as you can see in this picture. So this very nicely, Dr. Abhishek has already mentioned the color drawing and the fundus and illuminating the different structures and where we have to draw them. So I will not go into the details of this. Now coming to a very important technique of scleral indentation. The advantages are it gives a clear view of the structures in the retinal periphery, that is the ora serrata and the posterior border of the ciliary processes. It permits kinetic examination, allowing a stereoscopic view. The technique is that the thimble is placed in the index finger. The blunt tip of the depressor is placed on the skin of the eyelid over the area of sclera to be indented. Now we are looking at an example when we are examining the upper fundus periphery. What do? The eyelid has to be first closed. You apply the depressor tip to the upper lid at the upper edge of the tarsus. And when the patient opens the lid and looks up, the tip of the depressor slides easily under the orbital margin. One important thing to understand is that the depressor should be used always tangential to the globe. So this I have explained in the picture over here. Now here we are examining the inferior retinal periphery. But what do we tell the patient? We tell the patient to look in the opposite direction first. Place the scleral indenter and its tip in the inferior orbital margin, in the inferior eyelid. And when the patient slowly looks downwards towards the quadrant which you are examining, the thimble automatically moves backwards along the inferior orbital margin. It actually smoothly glides inwards and downwards, and you can get a very good view. So as opposed to many which understand that scleral indentation is a painful procedure, it is not if you are doing it very nicely and properly. So this is the advantage of scleral indentation. On the left-hand side picture, you can see that this horseshoe tear is basically, it could be mistaken for a pigmented lesion or just a hemorrhage. But when you do scleral indentation, the flaps of the horseshoe tear so nicely open up, and you can make out that this is a horseshoe tear and it needs immediate laser and urgent care. So this has already been explained earlier. Indirect ophthalmoscopy provides a stereoscopic view with a considerable depth of focus. 20 diopter lens is most commonly used, which provides a 37 to 40 degree field of view with a 3x magnification. And this point also has been nicely elucidated earlier. The higher the power of the condensing lens, the lesser is the magnification, but the bigger becomes the field of view. So this is a chart directly from the textbook. You can keep a printout of it, stick it to the wall. It's a short note many times. The difference between the direct and the indirect ophthalmoscopy, and these are different things that you have to keep in mind. So properly done indirect saves the patient's eye, can save your practice, and you can sleep well. So this is a short video. In these COVID eras, you have a screen. I have a screen between the optics and the patient's face, so that for added protection. Now I am adjusting the interpupillary diameter, and I'm doing centering against the thumb of the outstretched hand. Again, this has to be done in a darkened room, but for purposes of recording, I have kept the room lights on. Now you see that the dominant hand raises the upper lid as I've seen, as shown, and the 3 fingers are retracting the lower lid. The lens is kept down towards the face, and slowly you move it upwards till you get a very nice view. Now we are examining the inferior retinal periphery. You see how the lens is getting tilted, and I am moving backwards so that the 3 structures are in the same line, as I told you, keeping in mind the Gulfstran's principle. Now the patient is looking superiorly, and you have to move backwards and tilt the lens so that you can get all the 3 structures in the same line and you get a good view. Now when the patient moves, looks nasally, I'm standing temporally 180 degree opposite, and then you get a view from there. This is about scleral indentation that I told you. I'm now examining the inferior retinal periphery. The patient is looking upwards. And then slowly when the patient looks downwards, the thimble moves under the inferior orbital margin, and you get a good view of the inferior retinal periphery in this case. So thank you so much for your patient hearing. We will take as many questions as we can towards the end of the symposium. And you can ask any of the speaker, any of our esteemed panel, any doubts that you may have.
Thank you, ma'am, for a wonderful talk.
Thank you so much. Now we will go on to our next eminent speaker.
It's 8:45.
Dr. Saurav Sinha, who is a very senior and eminent vitreoretinal surgeon in Kolkata. He was the former consultant of Shankar Nethralaya, Chennai, and director of Netralayam in Kolkata. Dr. Saurabh Sinha will be speaking on indirect ophthalmoscopy in difficult situations. So over to you, Dr. Saurabh. Dr. Saurabh, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Perfect.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm so sorry for that. Uh, I like the phrase that, am I audible? Am my slides visible?
Yes, sir, you're audible and slides are perfectly visible.
Excellent. So I like the phrase where Dr. Pooja said, you have to be like a Bharatanatyam dancer. And I love that statement. I think it's really true. It sounds funny, but it's very, very true. You have to be agile to go around the patient back and forth and give instructions. Despite doing all that, you might have some difficulties. So it's important to see these difficulties, and some are in our mind, some are physical. This is a difficult slide, and I keep saying this. This for us doctors is really difficult. We can't make the head or tail of this. Even though I know in our microbiology days, pathology days, we mugged up drawings like this and Krebs cycle and this ATP cycle. But this is difficult and this is not easy to follow and remember. But here the difficulties are not there of being a poor doctor, poor patient, poor instrumentation, and clinical situations. So when I say poor doctor, I don't mean paisewala poor. I mean somebody is not well trained, even that is acceptable to me, but he's not well or very conversant with it. The more issues are that some of our colleagues, some people who are starting off, lack the patience to keep themselves motivated. So these are intermingling points, and will then say, I have a lack of time. Time lagta hai, so I don't want to do it. So I think these go hand in hand, insisting that I don't have the time for it, and therefore it's not necessary. I can get away with the direct ophthalmoscope. My patients don't need an endoscopy. I think is absolutely not acceptable, especially after the nice presentation that Dr. Shivani showed us multiple times. You will need an endoscope and has to be used routinely in our practice. Now, when I say poor patient, we saw Dr. Pooja's patient who was not very following instructions and putting your finger up and asking to follow the finger and giving clear instructions will help sometimes. You may have children, you may have an elderly patient, somebody is hard of hearing. It's important for us to recognize that the patient is hard of hearing or to understand this is a very apprehensive patient or somebody is not following instructions can be a little bit mentally challenged. I'm not talking about somebody stark raving mad. I'm talking about somebody little bit less IQ, somebody little bit less socially, very socially introverted. When there's a communication gap, we must pick that up very quickly to understand that this is going to be difficult to do the endoscopy on these patients. And it's our responsibility to make it happen in a more gentle manner. Now, also, I heard Dr. Vishal, Dr. Pooja kept saying about these importance of endoscope. And I think when you use old ones, they're misaligned, the lenses are scratched, the lenses are not very good, and you try to look through that, you're not seeing properly. The illumination is poor of your endoscope, and you say, oh, nahi dikhta hai. This, no, please understand some difficulties may be in your visualization, some difficulties lie with the instrumentation that you use, and one must be able to identify those and rectify those before declaring that I can't do, that I'm having a difficulty in doing indirect orthoscopy. I keep going back to the word again and again, difficulty in doing can be in your mind and also in the instrumentation that you use. Quickly, I'll go on to clinical situations. This is the fourth part. Now, you must recognize certain points, certain areas, certain times when it is difficult to do, or you cannot perform the indirect orthoscopy very well. Now, If you have small palpable fissures, it is difficult. It's difficult for you, it's going to be difficult for everybody. Make an attempt, decrease illumination, try your level best. Again, deep set eyes is sometimes difficult. Take your time, encourage the patient, but difficulty is definitely going to be there for you and for everybody else also. Now, in an eye like this, it's not a good idea to try and depress and see the periphery. Can do an endoscopy, little bit take a look inside, but with lesions like this, don't bother with depression and things like that. Again, you on the table can't stretch the people. On the OT table, you can do this, but here you can't. Just try and get a glimpse through this. Patients with posterior cyanic, elderly diabetic patients, non-dilating, pilocarpine, it will not. Don't make them sit for more than 20 minutes. If it has not dilated 20 minutes time, it will not dilate anything more than that. So I think this is something we need to accept and go ahead. It's going to be difficult doing endoscopy in this patient. Now, one must, that's why it's very, very important that before you start the endoscopy for the patient, you must make the patient sit in a straight time, take a very cursory quick glance. Is there a slight mild corneal haze? Is there a mild ECD action? Is there a PCO? Is there a lenticular opacity? Any of these opacities will make you or make your life difficult to do a good, clean, very well visualized endoscopy. You put the patient down and start doing that directly. You may be wondering, you may take a longer time, you may get irritated, and you may not realize why you're not able to do it. So first, rule out these particular issues and then go ahead. Now again, a post-category patient with small rexes, minimal PCO, IOL defect, poor dilation post-surgery, these are difficult situations. One will have difficulty. And again, like I said, it's difficult for you, it's difficult for everybody else. Make an attempt to the best of your ability and just go ahead after that. You cannot depress and go on and on harassing these patients, and you're harassing yourself also. We had this, I insist on this ability to depress, and we had the earlier Pooja talk about this, what the advantages are. I will come to one last slide which says where you do not depress and want to be aggressive in depression and see the peripherally, especially post. We do still have some patients operated years ago at Indore and stuff like that. Post PK, post RK surgery, long those RK marks are there. Very gentle depression if necessary at all. If others better to avoid. Presence of bleb, again, not a great idea of depressing these patients. Rubeosis hyphae have picked up, should not be depressed. It will cause to further bleeding. CNVM, I remember it's good to see the CNVM on the endoscope, but not good to depress these patients. Even PVR patients do not depress, will cause bleeding to occur. Globe rupture patients, anything like this. Sarde bola indirect karna hai and start depressing. No, not a good idea at all. And any early postoperative period of any intraocular surgery, do not depress and see the patients. It will cause depression for you only. So again, I come back to my last slide. You have to motivate yourself, saying lack of time is not an issue. You cannot make that an issue. You have to be make the patient comfortable. Be sure what you're looking at. Check your instrumentation before you start your endoscopy. And clinical situations not always easy to do in a lot of places. Thank you so much. I must thank Pooja for going on endlessly with this war against those not doing endoscopy. And I thank Pooja ma'am for inviting me here. Everybody's been saying that. I must say that also. Also, my group of practitioners, Dr. Nandi, Dr. Rupak Viswas, Dr. Pal, and Sudip, who joined us recently. Thank all of you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Saurabh, for making indirect ophthalmoscopy look so easy with your excellent slides. I did my VR fellowship from Shankar Nethralaya in Chennai, and that time Dr. Saurabh was a consultant, and we were difficult students in difficult situations, and you were so patient in explaining the different steps and elucidating the importance of color coding, fundus drawing, so many small tips. I still remember you've explained to us so nicely. So now we go on to our next speaker, Dr. Shalabh Sinha.
सर कुछ बोलना मैम सौरभ सर कुछ बोलना था अच्छा ठीक
Please go ahead, Dr. Vishal.
नहीं सौरभ sir was wanting to say something.
Yes, Dr. Saurabh, please.
So quickly, I'll say, when I was a fellow, I once remember leaving emergency and I attended Dhanashri Deshpande, madam, ये indirect तो होता ही नहीं मेरे से, जहाँ डिप्रेस का पेशेंट चिल्लाता है. She said, don't worry, मेरे से भी ऐसे ही हुआ था. So it's generation to generation, it happens continuously. She said when she came from her college in Sevagram, she said indirect she said I thought it was a big instrument or something. So it's always generation to generation. I think we need to keep it up, and these courses are very important.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Pooja.
So we'll go on to our next speaker for the day, Dr. Shalabh Sinha. Dr. Shalabh Sinha is a dynamic and brilliant vitreoretinal surgeon, and he's the director of Nayandeep Netralaya in Muzaffarpur. He'll be speaking on indirect ophthalmoscopy in the operating room, in the OR. So over to you, Dr. Shalabh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pooja ma'am, for giving me this opportunity, and to Dr. Partha and to AIOS for the opportunity. So when this topic was given to me, I was wondering, what am I going to speak on indirect ophthalmoscopy in the OR? But then I started thinking, and I realized that there are various indications for various surgeons. So as a retina surgeon, definitely you would be using a indirect ophthalmoscope in the operating room. But there is a role for the cataract surgeon, for the pediatric ophthalmologist, for the squint surgeon, and in cases of trauma. As far as the retina surgeon is concerned, you would want to do an indirect ophthalmoscope for your patient immediately following an intravitreal injection. You would want to check the venous or the arterial pulsations so that you can take measures if the intraocular pressure has gone up. Definitely, you would use a indirect ophthalmoscope for your scleral buckling surgery in retinal detachment cases. And you would need a indirect ophthalmoscope when you want to either cryo or laser. There may be breaks, tears, lattice, holes, which you need to cryo. You may need to laser babies for ROP, for PDR. I don't know how many of you would remember that historically, indirect ophthalmoscope was also used to do vitrectomy. Dr. Saurabh would probably may have seen some people doing that when there was no wide angle viewing system. Surgeons trained themselves to use the indirect and the inverted image of the indirect, and still they would do vitrectomy using the indirect ophthalmoscope. For a cataract surgeon, when does he need an indirect ophthalmoscope in his operating room? In cases where you are operating a patient, he has a white mature cataract, or and then because you're not able to do a pre-op examination, or you may not have done a B scan for the patient, or intraoperatively, suddenly you're operating a patient and the red glow becomes altered. So if there is a suprachoroidal hemorrhage on the table, you would know when to stop doing your surgery. If there is vitreous hemorrhage or there's asteroid hyalosis, you can differentiate between the two on the table. If there is macular pathology, like a wet AMD, or there is CSME or venous occlusions, you would want to inject anti-VEGF in the same sitting rather than calling the patient again for the injection. And for many of these patients with wet AMD or CSME, you can always take a clue from the other eye. If the other eye, you can see the fundus and there is diabetic macular edema in the other eye, there's more likelihood that after you remove the cataract and you see the fundus, you would have a similar kind of picture in the other eye. Or if there is a wet AMD in the other eye, there's a possibility of encountering it in the eye that you have just operated. So you can give the intravitreal injection in the same sitting. If by chance you have not done a B scan and you have an altered red glow, you can check for retinal detachment. Or if there is a PC rent, you can also do an indirect ophthalmoscope to see whether there's any drop fragment or intraocular lens or a capsule tension ring. You can at least see and diagnose in the operating room itself. For a pediatric ophthalmologist, for disc evaluation, you want to see a patient under anesthesia, he has ophthalmos, you want to measure the intraocular pressure, you want to check the corneal diameter, and you would also want to do a disc evaluation, which can only be done in the small children using an indirect ophthalmoscope. If the patient or the baby, the infant, has a white cataract, you have not been able to see the fundus, then you can, after you remove the cataract, you can immediately do an indirect ophthalmoscope to see the disc and the fundus, because the baby is already under GA and you would not want to do it when the baby is awake, because then it will be difficult. And in any other cases where you want to do an evaluation under anesthesia, the indirect ophthalmoscope is mandatory. What about a squint surgeon? You're doing a squint surgery and suddenly you think you have perforated the globe. Immediately, you would want to inspect that area using an indirect ophthalmoscope. And if there is a perforation on table, you would want to either laser or cryo it so as not to do it following the surgery, because the eye would be congested, and doing laser or cryo after the surgery would be slightly more difficult and risky. In trauma cases where you've just repaired the cornea and you want to see inside whether there's an intraocular foreign body or there is endophthalmitis, then you can you can decide the further course of action that you would want to take. If there is endophthalmitis, you would want to give intravitreal injection in the same sitting. If there is an intraocular foreign body and you can see it, then you can in the follow-up, either you do it if you have a VR setup, you can do it immediately, or you can send your patients to a VR surgeon immediately after you've done the corneal repair. So what are the prerequisites? So those of us who have been to Dr. Nagpal's, Dr. P. N. Nagpal's OT, I was surprised to see this. You have to become like Samba here. And these are two small bags into which you can put your hands. And this allows you to maintain the sterility of your gloves. And you don't need any other things to put on your indirect ophthalmoscope. And it is always a good idea to have a lens, a 20 diopter lens, which has been sterilized by ETO in your OT. And this is your regular indirect ophthalmoscope. And using your bags, this is how you can easily put on your indirect ophthalmoscope. Rest of the technique has already been shown by Dr. Pooja. So this is what I had to share as regards indirect ophthalmoscopy in OR. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharab. After seeing your presentation, I would say that even a general ophthalmologist who had doubts and was not motivated to do indirect ophthalmoscopy will surely change his or her mind after seeing your slides. So an excellent talk by you. Now we would go on to our star speaker, one of the star speakers of the day, Dr. Sangeet Mittal, who is a very eminent VR surgeon with numerous awards and publications to his name. He's very innovative, always trying new techniques. And he's the director of VR services in Thind Eye Hospital in Jalandhar. He'll be speaking to us on highlighting the importance of fundus drawing pre-operatively. So over to you, Dr. Sangeet.
Yes, sir, you're muted.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Pooja for giving me a chance to participate in this IC. I'm sharing my screen now. Is the screen visible?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Yes, sir, screen visible.
So the first thing that came into my mind is what will I speak on this topic, preoperative drawing and the significance of preoperative drawing. But then I realized how important fundus examination by indirect ophthalmoscope is preoperatively, which we learned in our residency days at Shankar Nethralaya. So I'll just highlight some of the points how this fundus drawing becomes significant. And nowadays I've seen surgeons who are doing all types of surgery without doing any drawings preoperatively. In my setup, we generally have residents who do the drawing. And so first of all, retinal detachment, as we all know, is the separation of neurosensory retina from RPE. And rhegmatogenous retinal detachment is a detachment caused by a retinal break. And the main aim of the fundus drawing is to highlight these breaks in a preoperative period, is to highlight these breaks and find these breaks, where these breaks are, because these breaks need to be treated, need to be closed while repairing a retinal detachment. And these breaks could be, these breaks do appear as discontinuities in the retinal surface, and they appear red because of the color contrast between the neurosensory retina and the underlying choroid. And there are various forms of these breaks. They could be in the form of horseshoe tears, or percolated breaks, holes, dialysis, or giant retinal tears. So those horseshoe tears, just a minute. You can see these horseshoe tears, they occur in almost 7 to 10% of cases of PVD, and they are due to traction. And many of them, or most of them, progress to retinal detachment within 6 weeks. The holes generally are seen in association with retinal with lattice degenerations, and they are present in almost about 18 to 40% of cases of lattice degenerations, and 30% of the RDs are caused by holes in lattices. And dialysis, again, post-traumatic dialysis. If the patient gives you a history of post-trauma, you have to do an indirect ophthalmoscopy. You have to look for the dialysis, and this is one major indication of doing an indirect ophthalmoscopy in a post-traumatic patient. As already, I think it has been discussed, for a fundus drawing, we used an Amsler-Du Bois chart, and I think it has already been discussed in a previous slide how to do a drawing, and this is a cartogram of universal color coding. So now I come to the significance. First significance, and I think that is one of the most important, is to keep a good clinical record for diagnosis and planning treatment and follow-up of the patient. So this is, you see, this is the one of the most significant part why you have to do a fundus drawing. You have to keep a good clinical record of the patient, and then this drawing helps in picking up many other features which you routinely don't pick up doing a routine indirect ophthalmoscopy in your clinic. But when you spend time doing a drawing, you may pick up much more than what you see while you saw the patient in the clinic. And this helps you plan your treatment, change your treatment, and also plan the follow-up with the patient. Again, post-operatively, you have to keep a record. Second important significance is of fundus drawing before surgery is to enhance communication between different healthcare professionals. If you are associated with other people, you may discuss your cases with them. If you send a proper fundus drawing to him, take a picture of the fundus drawing, the other person may also be able to guide you what is to be done. And it will be a better option rather than sending a fundus photograph, which won't give you such a good clinical picture. And in cases of media, this fundus drawing becomes very important. Again, clinical records like fundus drawings are also valuable documents to audit the quality of healthcare services and research. So in our setup, once we were doing a study, a retrospective analysis of a patient, we generally nowadays we do vitrectomy as a primary procedure for retinal detachment. So I wanted to know in which patient had how many breaks and in which quadrants the breaks were located. So we were easily able to retrospectively analyze our data that, okay, this patient had 2 breaks and these were located in different quadrants, or these were located in the same quadrants, just because we had a good fundus drawing with us. So if you don't do a preoperative fundus drawing, you may be missing such clinical record or such important information if you are doing a research later on in various categories. Again, another important reason for a fundus drawing is for medical legal issues. And what is usually said is if you have not documented it, it means you have not seen it. And but if you have a proper fundus drawing done, it means that you have properly seen the patient, you have properly examined, the patient, and this carries a lot in medical legal departments. Again, documentation, as I already pointed out, doing a fundus drawing, it helps, it improves your observational skills because we draw what we see. As I told you, only if you look at the fundus, doing an indirect ophthalmoscopy in a clinic is a lot different than what you draw when you are properly making a fundus drawing. You see a lot more than what you see when you are examining the patient in the clinic. Again, it gives better information as compared to a fundus picture. You see, this was a fundus picture. This was a collage made by my associate. And though she was able to pick up all the lattices and holes in this picture, but a simple fundus drawing highlighted where all these lattices were located and how many holes were present and what we had to do. This is a small video I would like to show. This is just because this was a simple patient of a superior retinal detachment. We took the patient up for a vitrectomy and gas, and we did. This was a tear. There were two of them, and we did drainage of the internal drainage of the fluid, and then we were supposed to finish off this case. And at this point of time, I took a look at the fundus drawing, and I remembered that there was another hole in the retina, in an attached retina. So because I had a fundus drawing in my hand, I memorized this thing and I was able to treat it at the same time and did not miss the break. Again, planning of some surgical steps will also depend upon your fundus drawings. Here you can see this was a patient of inferior retinal detachment with a break at 6 o'clock. And and when I looked at the fundus drawing and looked at the patient, I had already made a plan that I have to drain the SRF drainage in this quadrant at this point. So this also helps in planning of surgical steps. Again, decision making is very important. You can see in the left hand side there is a simple retinal detachment, inferior retinal detachment. I will probably do a buccal with an external drainage in this patient. While looking at this drawing in the second, in the middle, a superior HST with a bullous retinal detachment. I planned for a vitrectomy with gas, and the last patient in which there were multiple tears all around, and there was, means that there is some element of circumferential traction. I planned a vitrectomy with encerclage. And now coming to the location, identifying the location of primary breaks, you can see this is according to the Linkoff's rules. You see this is a subtotal retinal detachment, and what Linkoff tells us that 98% of the time the break will lie within 1.5 clock hours of the highest border. So just by looking at the configuration of the retinal detachment, you can make out where the retinal break would be. And again, this is an inferior detachment with equal height, and the break will usually lie between 5 and 7 o'clock position. And this is inferior detachment with unequal heights, and the inferior break is located in the higher quadrant, the quadrant in which the fluid is higher. Again, superior detachments that cross 12 o'clock position, many of the times the break will lie in the triangle which is formed by the 11 o'clock, optic disc, and the 1 o'clock position. And in inferior bullous detachment, if the and just looking at the configuration, if the detachment is inferior and is bullous, we generally have to look superiorly, and there could be a shallow peripheral sinus with the break in the superior quadrant connecting the break to the retinal detachment. And then it helps in visualization problems during surgery in the cases of decentered IOLs or in severe capsular fibrosis, vitreous tags, leaking incisions, hampered visualization, corneal edema, and small pupils. I remember one case I was doing vitrectomy, and during the vitrectomy, the pupils became small and the view became very hazy. And but due to the fundus drawing that I had in my hand, I knew exactly where the break was, and I was able to successfully manage this patient. So to conclude, precise documentation is essential for multiple reasons. Mostly important, accurate surgical planning. And a detailed drawing improves our observational skills, and the notes made during the drawing of fundus can often provide more details than photography alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sangeet, for your excellent slides and for so nicely enumerating how critical it is to do indirect ophthalmoscopy and how a lot of findings can be taken into account and the patient will be managed very well. So now we'll just go on to a few questions that the postgraduates may, be benefited with. So, Dr. Sangeet, if I could ask you, can you enumerate a few few important indications where you felt that if indirect ophthalmoscopy was not done, the management would have completely changed? Some few indications that you have in mind.
As I told Dr. Pooja, one thing is indirect. I will prefer to do an indirect ophthalmoscopy, whatever the case would be, rather than as such. I don't remember any incident in which these things happen. But as I pointed you, one day I was doing a surgery, I was doing vitrectomy, and suddenly the pupils became smaller, and there was nothing what I could see. I could barely see the retina during the surgery. At that time, I had this fundus drawing in my hand, and because I knew where exactly the break was, I did manage that patient. And change of plan, as I told you, just by looking at the fundus drawing, you can change your decision. If I looked at the fundus drawing of a patient, just a superior retinal detachment with with the breaks in the superior quadrant. But when I looked at the fundus drawing, there were multiple breaks in an attached retina also. So earlier I had planned to do just a vitrectomy for this patient, but looking at the fundus drawing, I just saw the fundus drawing and I changed my plan from vitrectomy to vitrectomy with an encircling band, because there was presence of HSTs in all quadrants means that there is some kind of circumferential traction at the base. So this way, I think indirect ophthalmoscopy is very helpful in all the patients of retina. So if Dr. Ellie used to say that if you can't do indirect ophthalmoscopy, you can't be a retinal surgeon. So that's
yes. The one very important misconception which postgraduates have is that indirect ophthalmoscopy is a very difficult procedure. It's very difficult to learn it, very difficult to do it. So, Dr. Saurabh, can you offer some tips as to how to overcome this learning curve? What all patients, are good candidates, and how do we go about it?
I'll give a different thing. Those who are switching and don't have a training program, I would suggest that what I did maybe 25 years back, I would see with my direct ophthalmoscope in a normal patient, well dilated normal patient, and then I would put my indirect over there. Then I started seeing in diabetic maculopathies only. I wasn't looking at the periphery. I was just reading my mind initially to see direct se kya dikhta hai, then put on the indirect and same patient see the indirect. Because I didn't have anybody to teach me. I didn't know how to put a chart on the chest, nothing. I would make them sit. So I would keep training myself, just sitting and seeing the patient with direct first, again with indirect. Again direct, again indirect. Then right eye, left eye. So initially to get over that feeling of niche dikh raha hai, am I seeing up? Am I seeing the other side? What is inverted? I think yourself do the direct and indirect repeatedly, same patient with just central lesions, orient yourself. And I think that helps to some extent.
Thank you, sir.
There's a question by Dr. Punita Sodhi. Dr. Pooja, would you like to answer that?
One second.
In the chat, please explain the guidelines to be followed for examining fundus with indirect ophthalmoscope during ROP examination and demarcating margins of laser, ridge, ora as a whole. Avascular retina lying in between these is to be lasered.
So basically for ROP, you need very good visibility, very good field of view. The field of view has to be very extensive, even if the magnification is not too much. So that is why we have higher condensing power lenses to examine ROP patients. And the guidelines that we follow are mostly the same. Indirect ophthalmoscopy has to be mastered when you're doing ROP, because as Dr. Saurabh so nicely pointed out, these patients are not at all cooperative. and they don't follow the very set norms that you have in mind. So you have to have.
Can I intervene, please?
Yes, sir.
Can I
Please,
intervene?
please go ahead.
So, I of course, I'm not doing any ROP right now, but I think Sangeet will correct me. What is the exact you should
So not hearing you.
the speculum that we use should be specific for the ROP babies, and also the depressor use should be specific for the ROP babies. I'm not going to demarcation line reach and that part, but since this is an course, Dr. Pineet, I don't know if he's asking more about the laser part of it or the examination. But in examination, the correct lens, the correct speculum, and the correct depressor should be used.
See, for ROP examination, one thing is like you have to maintain a good sterile environment. Even if you are examining in your outdoor patients, you have to clean. This is the first prerequisite because these babies are very susceptible to infection. Then the lens that we use, I generally use two types of lenses, either a 2.2 lens or a 30 diopter lens. The 2.2 gives me adequate magnification and adequate field of view in examining these babies. And the depressor, the speculum I use is the neonatal speculum with one side, one arm of the speculum having a bigger aperture, and the other side having a smaller this folding lid holding part. So the smaller lid holding part goes directly into the bigger one, and you can easily insert into the small babies, and you can use that. I don't remember exactly what the speculum is called. Then, the depressor that I use is a smaller in size, or you can use the straight depressor that is available, and you can use with two heads. It is available with two heads. One, it is smaller part, and other is like a small rod attached. So you can use the round ball type thing to depress these type of babies. If you don't have that depressor, I sometimes also use, we have used paper clips that are routinely available in our offices to depress those eyes and see because they go easily inside that part. I think, but definitely, as you have said, these are the most tough patients to examine, and only once you have mastered your indirect ophthalmoscopy, you should try examining these babies.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Abhishek, normally postgraduates have this problem that what part of the fundus they are seeing is actually what image is forming is actually what they are seeing, or is it diametrically opposite? So the part that is being examined, is it the same that you are seeing, or is it the opposite side that you are seeing? For the benefit of the postgraduates, can you please explain?
So as explained in the presentation, to negate this problem, we keep the chart inverted, like the 12 o'clock position of the chart has to be put towards the feet end, and the 6 o'clock goes towards the head end. So whatever we see in the, suppose we are seeing in the supratemporal quadrant, so that has to be drawn in the area of the chart which is nearer to you. So you are examining the patient supratemporal quadrant, and you are standing on the suppose you are examining the right eye and you are standing on the left side of the patient. So the part of the chart, the supratemporal quadrant, is already, because of the inversion, it's nearer to you, and it is, so you have to draw that in the part which is nearer to, that means the inferonasal quadrant. So when you rotate the chart, it will automatically point towards the supratemporal quadrant. So when you have inverted the chart, you should not worry whatever we are seeing, what we are not seeing, laterally reversion or inversion, nothing. Don't worry about anything. Just draw whatever you are seeing. Just draw the mirror image, nothing else.
That's a very important point that you have elucidated. So, Dr. Vishal, would you like to add the last take-home message, please?
I think what Vishek, like in case of indirect ophthalmoscopy, what he said, like that confusion thing, it's very simple. For just to make it more simple, suppose you take example of if you're examining the 12 o'clock position. So in 12 o'clock position, you will be seeing from the 6 o'clock position. That's when you're viewing. You will have to always remember which area which clock hour you are seeing, and Then you, as he has said, the chart will be turned upside down. Just keep it in the other way, and you draw whatever you see. And will you place this chart properly, then all the structure we have drawn, that will come into position. What you had seen laterally reversed, those will be as it was in the fundus. And the thing is, what Saurav said, initial for the beginner, they should practice in the normal patient. Like for PGs and those people, they should make it a routine. Like after every normal OPD, they will select some 10 to 15 patients, they will dilate it, and just they will start seeing those patients. With this, they can master. Because if they try to find, like suppose if the surgeon tells this RD, you have the break in the supratemporal quadrant, they will try to see. But first you have to have the whole fundus view on your 20 diopter. That is very important. So that you can practice with the clear cornea, clear lens, those normal people. Once you start focusing, then you can go for the mastering the procedure.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Vishal. And this brings us to the end of our instruction course on indirect ophthalmoscopy. I hope it's been a learning curve, learning experience for everyone, and some benefit has been achieved by all the postgraduates and everyone listening to us. So can I request everyone to switch on their video so that we can take a group photograph, please? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
You all.